Welcome, everyone. It's so exciting to have you all here at the JournalismAI Festival that is starting today and going on for the full week, Monday to Friday. As you know, we are looking forward to keep seeing all of you during the chats. And I'm gonna just give a very quick introduction, especially to let you know what you can expect from this call, which you wonderfully decided to join. As it says, again, welcome. This is the key message for me of these first few minutes. This is our first JournalismAI Festival, and we are so excited to have you all here. The festival, as it says pretty much everywhere on the website and so on, is a celebration of the most exciting developments at the intersection of journalism and artificial intelligence. And I would add, of the most amazing people we had the chance to meet and work with over the past a bit less than 2 years. This is your lineup for today. So very soon I will have the pleasure to introduce Charlie, David, and Shirley. And the goal of this session is, on one side, of course, to introduce ourselves, what JournalismAI is, who we are, what it does. Maybe I should have started by saying something like, my name is Mattia, blah, 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 but okay, I'm doing it now. I will share what we're going to do in this session, where we want to give you a sense of why we're doing this, especially, and why we set up JournalismAI at the beginning, and what we have been doing over the past 2 years, if you're not familiar yet with the activities of the project. And then we will run you through the week. So we will look together at the program so that you know what you can expect from the various days and the different tracks of the program specifically. And we will then start talking and chatting together. So Charlie will share with us some of the reflections from the research we have done last year in the report and things he has learned on the way. I will leave the virtual floor now to Charlie Beckett, who is the director of the project, and of POLIS, the think tank at the LSE, who will also give us a more formal welcome than what I was able to do in this past few minutes. Hi, Charlie.
Hi. Thanks very much, Mattia, and thanks to you and the team for putting this whole week together. I'm a professor at the London School of Economics. I used to be a journalist, and for the last 15 years, I've been running a journalism think tank called POLIS. And this project, I know it's traditional to say that you're excited about something, but I am really excited about this project, partly because of the outputs that we've already had, the report, the training, the events that we've done. But above all, what's really excited me about this is that I've been learning a huge amount, and I'll try and talk a bit about that later. But at the heart of this, what's made it so exciting, and today is another example, is the incredible enthusiasm of our network. And I want to stress that everything we do is very much driven by that network. The participants in things like the collab project, but also the 2,000 plus people who have signed up across the world. And that is so exciting, how global and international this is. So it's very much driven by the network. We've achieved an enormous amount. I've been really lucky that I've been editing and seeing all the fantastic work that you're going to see over this week. And I can guarantee that you are in for a very stimulating time. It's a celebration, but it's also talking about a lot of the difficulties and challenges that AI and journalism faces, especially at the time of this pandemic. And thinking about that, everyone is so busy and so stressed by the pandemic, and yet the amount of energy and insight and hard work that people have put into this has been quite extraordinary, and that really does make me very, very pleased and very excited. This project would not have been possible without the support of the Google News Initiative. So I'm just going to hand over to David Dieudonné, who is our man with the GNI, who's going to say a few words about what he thinks about this project and why they've been involved. Over to you, David.
Thank you so much, Charlie. And hello, everyone. I'm sincerely delighted to be joining you today, as I think it really is an important day for everyone who is exploring at the intersection of AI and journalism. I'd like to say that nothing happens by chance. Exactly 2 years ago today, it was on December 7th of 2018, we were in the Google office in London to launch Journalism AI, this new program at that time, which aimed at fostering AI literacy in newsrooms globally through research, training, and experiments. Since then, more than 4,000 people have downloaded the Journalism AI report you wrote, Charlie, and which is now the bedrock of this program. It crucially revealed also that media organizations are keen to collaborate with one another and with technology companies, and that's why we're here today, I guess. More than 62,000 journalists since then have also taken Introduction to Machine Learning, which is the online course we crafted together with the LSE and the Belgian broadcaster VRT. And it was provided in 17 languages on the GNI Training Center. And then over 20 media organizations, all of you, I guess, are here, including La Nación, Reuters, the South China Morning Post, and the Washington Post have joined the collab. We'll talk at length about it later. This global partnership to experiment with AI. So this is the idea of today, to mark this anniversary together with Charlie, Mattia, and the whole team. We've decided to offer you, whether you are an international academics, publishers, or practitioners, a week-long opportunity to gather, to share experiences, and to strengthen the ties of what we see as a growing community. As you just mentioned, Mattia and Charlie, this unique gathering will be an opportunity to hear the collab teams present the findings of their work around key challenges, such as using AI to mitigate newsroom biases, or another challenges they've been working on, increasing audience loyalty. On Wednesday, we'll uncover a new training course on the Google News Initiative Training Center, built with Ukrainian data journalism agency Texty. This hands-on curriculum will be available in 16 languages again, and it will help journalists learn how to train an algorithm to identify similar patterns in satellite imagery using Google Cloud AutoML Vision. On Thursday, this is a full week, my colleague Megan Chan will present Pinpoint, Google's tool to help reporters quickly research hundreds of thousands of documents by automatically identifying the most commonly mentioned people, places, and locations on these documents. And then finally, all week long, we'll host dedicated GNI live training sessions. This is the training format that is run online by our teaching fellows in 6 languages. And these sessions will help reporters build a similar model that Texty used for their investigation. As I said, nothing happens by chance, and these achievements have only been possible thanks to the persistent hard work of an exceptional team who has defeated every possible hurdle, including the incredibly difficult challenges posed by the current pandemic. So today I'd like to sincerely thank you, Mattia, and Charlie. I'd like to thank the Texty team as well for working hard on the creation of this new training program. And then from the Google News Initiative, many people were involved. I'd like to would like to thank in particular Vincent Ryan, who created the training course together with Mattia. Megan Chan, who I mentioned is going to present Pinpoint. Samia Aish, who will give you a specific focus on the training course as well. Michael Kaiser and Mac Cook, who was on stage to launch this project 2 years ago, for those who remember that day in London, and who has been a formidable sponsor to this project. So thank you too for watching. I wish you a fantastic festival, and I wish long life to the Journalism AI community. Thank you.
I'm here with Shirley, our festival producer, with Charlie, the director of the Journalism AI project, and David from the Google News Initiative, who just introduced us and gave us an overview to what Journalism AI has been up to over the past couple of years. And I want to build on what David was sharing with us by going a little bit more in depth of the various activities that we have run so far. So it's going to be a quick run through of our main activities of the past 24 months before handing it over to Charlie, who will share with us some of the findings of the research from last year, and also add a little bit more on what he found out and learned after we published the report about 1 year ago. So at this point, I will start sharing my screen, and I will start by showing you the report page, which you should just see. This is the link on our blog, and you also find it on our website, where you can download the report. The report is the result of a global survey that we ran in 2019, interviewing more than 70 news organizations all over the world to find out what they were doing with AI, and not just the activities and the applications and trying to categorize them, but also we talk with the journalists and with the newsroom people to understand what does it mean for them to work with AI, what are their expectations for the future and the concerns as well that they might have about the adoption of these new technologies. And really this report is the ground upon which everything else was built. So all of the other activities were guided by the information that we were able to gather through this research and the report. Moving forward about our activities, one of the other things that we decided to focus on was to train, in a sense, journalists. So we wanted to introduce as many journalists as possible across the world to the potential of AI and machine learning technologies. And we did that by curating resources that were existing already that you can find on our website, which I will link to later in the presentation, but also by creating our own training materials. So Introduction to Machine Learning is a training course that has been published last May on the Training Center of the Google News Initiative, and really is an overview for journalists that are not familiar with the topic of what machine learning is, what it can be used for, and what are some of the main use cases that people have been using machine learning. Moving on, we're looking at a new training course that we will publish on Wednesday, actually, which will build on the first one to actually share more in practice of an exercise of how machine learning can be used specifically for recognizing and classifying images in vast data sets. And other than the training, something else that we decided to focus on this year is the collab, which is short for collaborative experiment. And it's an international collaboration that we launched this year in June of 2020. And for the past 6 months, about 40 journalists from 20 news organizations, more than 20 actually, have been working together in 5 teams to kind of explore new solutions that AI might make available for journalism. And over this week of the festival, of course, they will be the big stars of what we're doing here, as they will show you the findings of their research reports, of their studies, and the experiments they have run. So the collab page is here on the website and will be updated during the week with all the links you need in order to explore the very rich and varied work of our collab. As I mentioned a few times, we have a website, which is kind of like the centralized place where you can find all the information you need about Journalism AI. You can actually access it very quickly at journalismai.info. And in there, you will find quick links to everything I've been talking about before and that we will explore during the week. So you'll be able to explore the report, find more information and the links to our training courses, as well as the collab and its links. And also the case studies, which I wanted to tell you about as well, because we have heard from our community about the importance of understanding in practice what does it mean to work with AI. And therefore, we started earlier in the year collecting and updating constantly a huge amount of examples and case studies that we are able to find online about the use of AI for different areas of the journalistic work. So examples about news gathering and how to use machine learning for investigations, for example, or other examples about the news production and the automation of it. And as you can see, examples from various news organizations from across the world, and also general examples of research and innovation, ethics, diversity, common moderation, and so much more. We also try to share many insights from our community. So we really want to highlight the best examples that we find. And therefore, on our blog, which is also linked from the central website, you will find all the stories and the interviews and the articles that we have been writing over the past 12 months. I was about to say 12 years, which of course is not the case. And you will find, again, lots of interviews. For example, this one with Swedish Radio about an algorithm for empowering public service news that they have developed, as well as updates from the collab, specifically with Diary, and over interviews to people like Uli here from Bavarian Radio on how to adapt your newsroom to AI. Using this example of Uli, the last thing I wanted to mention, that specifically from the insights, you will be able to access this small so far, but expanding series that we are really proud of interviews with women that are working at the intersection of journalism and artificial intelligence. We started doing this after noticing the lack of diversity and gender balance, let's say, in the field of AI. And therefore, this is our contribution to tiny contribution, at least, to showcase the incredible work of some of the women that we had the pleasure and possibility to work with. Most of them will actually be festival speakers during this week, so you will be able to hear more from them, from Anna, from Uli, Agnes, Alissa, and so on. At this point, I think this is an overview, as hopefully complete as possible, of what JournalismAI is, and I hope that it shows you really the vast amount of activities that we run, really with the unique mission of helping news organizations get on top of the potential that AI can offer. As I said, everything was based on the report and the research we have been doing last year. So at this point, I will hand over to Charlie, who is the director of the program, who will also tell us a bit more in depth about what we're really finding out from our community about how AI can help the journalism industry.
Thanks, Mattia. Thanks, Mattia. Indeed, it's been an extraordinary couple of years, to be honest. And as I mentioned, I'm particularly enjoying this process, frankly. It's been a tough year, hasn't it, for everybody? But I've really been enjoying this process, mainly because I've been learning so much and discovering so much. And we're doing that by looking at what people are doing in this field and working with them. And, you know, our report was really interesting a year or so ago. It gave me that sense of how AI might be changing journalism. We could see that despite the sort of scare stories of robots taking over, in fact, most people in the field are using AI to augment editorial work or indeed revenue work, working with audiences. But it wasn't to replace journalists, it was to power them, if you like. There was also a clear message that there was a huge knowledge gap right across, not just specialist knowledge, but knowledge more generally in news organizations about this technology, and we have tried to address that. And then the big picture on sort of strategy. How do you approach innovation? How do you approach implementation around that? That was the other big message. And in the last year especially, now we've been working so closely with these teams of news people. Other things are really emerging as we get into the granular detail of what it's really like to try to implement AI solutions and all the kind of challenges around that. They're not just technological. In fact, most of them are editorial. It's about people. It's about, is the AI going to work for the journalists? And of course, perhaps most importantly, is it going to improve the journalism for users, consumers, the public? And there are some things that have sort of leapt out. One of the materials just mentioned that, you know, I had this idea that tech has got a big historic bias against women, basically, women working in tech. And yet, in this field at least, there seems to be loads of really good women. Now, we didn't select people to get involved with our collab, so I don't know how representative it is. But as you'll see, majority of the speakers in this festival are women. And of course, all women are different, and they all have different reasons to be working at this intersection between AI and journalism. Some are coming from journalism, so is that because there are lots more women in journalism? But also a lot are coming from a kind of data science background as well, and that's really interesting. As Mattia says, we've got this blog series explaining some of their kind of career background, but I've got a kind of feeling that one of the reasons why, perhaps anyway, women are getting involved is that there are new ways of working. It's more cross-disciplinary, it's more teams, it's less hierarchical. And I don't know, I think there's a lot of men who like that kind of working as well. But it does go to the other big thing that has emerged for me anyway in this last year, and that's this idea of collaboration. And collaboration we knew about journalists getting together, for example, to do big global investigations. But what we can see is that collaboration isn't just a sort of comfortable word. It isn't just a nice thing to do. For me, I think collaboration is absolutely essential, because individual journalists, individual product innovators, or even individual news organizations just can't do it on their own. We don't have the knowledge, we don't have the experience, and it's also really, you'll see this in the festival sessions, it's been a really empowering experience for people to work with across the normal divides. So it could be within a news organization. The journalists have to now talk to the marketing people. They have to talk to the data people, because that's where the material is going to come for news gathering. And then there's so many things you can learn by working with other news organizations, of course, and often completely different news organizations. It might be, we've had people from major global news organizations working with local or specialist news organizations, and they really are feeding off each other, and they're able to support each other. And for me, as a traditional journalist who I spent 20 years furiously competing with other journalists and with other news organizations, I think that's fascinating. And I don't think it's not just fascinating, I think it's really essential. And I don't know, Mattia, do you think it's just, the fact we're doing this collab, or do you think there's something out there that's more intrinsic to the way that people do product innovation and that kind of working?
I think actually very interestingly, what we are doing fits with general patterns that we're seeing in the industry as like new roles evolving, and definitely technology and AI specifically is contributing to that. And that's what I find extremely interesting in this job. Like when I joined you, Charlie, to actually manage this collaboration, previously I was working at the AJC. I was managing news impact programs and also innovation events. And in a sense, the vibe feels the same. Like the community hasn't changed. The people working with AI are not foreign people doing something weird on the side, but they are kind of the same people that have been working on the previous waves of innovation in journalism over the previous years. So that's refreshing in a sense to notice how the familiarity of having to deal with another wave of innovation, which, yes, sure, it's special, it's AI, but luckily newsrooms have been adapting, and I think David can speak to that too quite clearly, to innovation over the recent years. And so they're maybe better equipped than they were a decade ago to face the challenges and the opportunities that AI proposes to them.
Yeah, can I bring you in there, David? Because, I'm seeing this from a journalism lens, and I can see how news organizations are doing something that they often used to find very uncomfortable, working with other people, and even working with people like me, someone in a university, and of course, the tech companies. I wonder, do you think this is structural, and do you think it's perhaps reflects your world? You move from journalism into the big tech world. Is that more of a way of working in that kind of field?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say that it's really, for me, the most striking insights from your work, Charlie, and your report. This idea that collaboration was needed was creating enthusiasm, but not only collaboration within the industry, but across the industry, even towards tech companies. So it's very humbling for us. It's kind of impose a duty for us to be good partners in this collaboration. That's what we're trying to do, trying to bring in as much as we can in terms of technology and knowledge. I mean, that's one of the first principles that we laid out when we started defining our AI principle, trying to make them socially beneficial. So doing it toward journalists was a top priority. And then through the years, like the 2 years that we've been working together, I've been amazed by how smoothly and how productively it has been, and see all these case studies which have been studied, analyzed, and then worked on even beyond what has been achieved. I mean, we're going to go through the collab's findings, but it's for me extremely impressive to see how these experts getting together have achieved and produced, and now ready to share to the public, which for me is extremely inspiring.
Thanks, David. I mean, the other big thing for me that has emerged, especially in the last 6 months, as the collab teams have got to grips with some really key core questions for journalism, like, you know, how to use your archive material in a way that you're making the most of your resources. Key question, how do you engage audiences? How do you retain their attention? And of course, how do you get them to pay for the journalism? But also a really interesting one looking at the idea of biases. So this is a much more kind of editorial, ethical challenge they looked at. And overall, I'm going to have to say I'm not a techie guy. You know, I'm fascinated by digital transformation, but I don't claim to be able to understand coding and things like that. And over the last 6 months, I've really appreciated, in a way, that how tricky it is to implement AI-powered solutions, especially for journalism, where there are so many other demands. You know, you've got to tailor the technology to your brand, your editorial policy. And it's been fascinating watching people trying to come up with ways of implementing those solutions, and then having to stand back and in a way thinking about, you know, the strategic piece of this is almost more important, because one of the things I'm very excited about these technologies. You know, I think that it's another wave of ways that journalists can use tech to connect their journalism and create better journalism. But it's difficult, and that's partly because there's a lot of hype around AI, some of it quite negative, but I think it tends to overestimate how easy. There are some quite simple things that AI or machine learning or automation can do. It can do things at scale, it can do things very quickly, but actually it does very simple things best. And journalism, generally speaking, is quite complicated. Stories are quite complicated, and it's quite difficult to format them in a way that people will find accessible and relevant. So in practice, it's quite complicated. The AI is quite limited. And then when you start to address some of the ethical challenges, for example, around bias, and this impacts on all of the challenges, actually. So we've got one collab looking directly at the issue around how can AI actually help us measure gender bias in our content, for example, and then how to correct it. And that's quite tricky. But even the other challenges who are looking at things like trying to get people's attention, there's an ethical dimension to that, because you don't just want to trap people with clickbait. You actually want to give them, and not just stuff that they are familiar with, you want to surprise them and show them to content, your other great content they might not have come across. So it's quite a sophisticated thing, and I've been really impressed by the way that the teams have thought about this. Perhaps it's because they've been able to get out of the daily grind of the newsroom, but they've been really reflective and thoughtful and tried to come up with guidelines, ways of thinking, ways of approaching AI, even before you start getting to that granular piece about what kind of tools might work best in particular situations. And one of the I think the biggest conclusions of this is that the human factor is absolutely vital. You have to have that editorial control over the data or the programming that you create, and then you have to have that editorial oversight over what you've created, the content that you've created, and you may have to, iterate and adjust. So that's why when you're going to look at some of the output of our collab teams, they have created a huge amount of content, and they have come up with some very clever solutions, or at least pathways, because of course every newsroom is different, every journalist is different, every story is different, and so the AI has to be adaptable for those purposes. And I think you'd agree, Mattia, that the work they've created is actually, it's been very rich, but it's almost raised as many questions as it has answers, hasn't it?
Absolutely, and maybe the value of the entire work is actually in the help that it has given the participants, the newsrooms that joined us in the collab, to actually reflect on this topic. So it was never the presumption that we were going to find simple answers for such a complex field, and an amount of technologies that are so varied and so powerful in so many different ways. But we did notice the opportunity that this gave the participants, and they told us this as well in our chats, to reflect together about this. The opportunity to do this in a multidisciplinary way. So there are people with many different roles are part of the collab. Maybe sometimes we say journalist because it's the simple way to talk about them, but there are people from all departments of the newsrooms working together to see how AI can help their specific work, and therefore then the business line of the industry as a whole, of their own media organization. So I completely agree. It's been an exciting journey, and I'm looking forward over the next few days, of course, to share the links. We'll do it via our newsletter. We'll do it with our calls. So we're just anticipating here, but the meat is going to come over the week, day by day, with our specific sessions, and we will start in the first chat we will have with our collab coaches also this afternoon in London at least. So in a couple of hours here.
Yeah, and that's been one of the amazing things about this whole project, has been the pandemic has meant that we're remote, but in fact we're incredibly connected. And it's been quite exhilarating to work with teams from different corners of the world, not just because it's kind of exotic, but also because that has brought real insights. I mean, just language, just thinking about the problems of language, so with our training courses, we've managed to get them into different languages. And for me, thinking forward, I really do hope that people feed back to us, that they give us their questions, that they tell us what they would like to hear. And also, we're hoping this whole project will roll on for at least another year. And there are so many avenues that I think can open up. For me, one of the really interesting possibilities is that the more that journalists or people working in news understand this technology, the more they can help us all think it through, because it's not just a technical problem. As I say, there's also a whole raft of kind of editorial, ethical, policy issues. And I think if this technology is shaping the future of journalism to an extent, and I think it is, then I think it's really important as many people get across this and contribute to that conversation. That's very much what we're here for. We're very much driven by our network and what they're telling us. And some of that should be critical. I think that, we should be very critical about the technology, or who has control of it, how much do we know about it, what do we do about it. So I think there's a real role actually for journalists. We're going to be in a world that is much more algorithmically driven, much more data driven. So even if you don't think that you're going to be particularly interested in product innovation, for example, I think anyone connected with journalism, whether they're doing the marketing piece, whether they're doing the story creation piece, they are going to be working in a AI context to some extent. And they're going to have to create stories about it as well. We need to report well on what is happening to our world because of these technologies, as well as understanding how it's going to impact on our journalism, our news industry. So I hope that this whole week raises as many questions and potential ways for us to go. We're not just here to try and deliver solutions. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And I think that's it's a little bit unnerving if you're a professor, because you're supposed to know it all. But this has absolutely been the opposite. It's been a journey of discovery for me, and I think most of the people that have been involved. So feedback to us, please. Okay, thanks, Mattia.
Thank you, Charlie. We are actually following on the topic of questions. We are receiving a couple of questions on our Telegram channel that Shirley has been kindly filtering for us. Just to remind you all, if you're following the live stream, the Telegram channels, I think, is accessible with, Shirley, correct me if I'm wrong, t.me/journalismai. I hope I'm right. Shirley is nodding, so I must be right. And just in terms of the questions, we are getting a couple already, and I think an interesting question, Charlie, I would love to hear what you have learned from the collab, is how do we actually implement successful collaboration? Like, over these months, what has been a key for you to make this collaboration, the collab, valuable? And David, I know you also have quite an experience with the GNI of like organizing and contributing to collaboration, so I would love to hear your take as well of what are the things beyond the technology, what are the things that make collaboration successful?
Yeah, I think for us, it's a slightly different culture in terms of collaboration, in the sense that people are they're not expected to, deliver a tool or a product at the end of it. It's more a way of, as I said, being more reflective. But I think the lessons for it are that you've got to let the people in the teams create their own systems and create their own mini culture around the collaboration, and it's very specific to the kind of task that they're doing. Some have been more kind of researchy, some have been more focused on the actual implementation, and I do think there are lessons there for anybody trying to do product innovation, which is that you have to be strategic about it. You have to do your background research, as well as just focusing on the precise use case that you're seeking. And I think with such an emergent technology, with so much happening around the world in different contexts, and that was absolutely vital. People kept coming back to that idea of the actual context. And I think the collaboration bit is partly to sort of free yourself up. It's creating mini networks where people can be a bit more expansive before they then get down to well, let's actually try and drill down to something that other people can use. Above all, though, it's about enthusiasm. And I think it's about giving people who have got the curiosity and they've got the commitment, giving them some kind of space, some kind of runway where they're able to, flex those muscles, if you like. So, as I keep saying, collaboration sounds like a cozy word, but actually it's quite dynamic and quite exciting and quite liberating for people as well. Don't know if you agree, David.
Yeah, I fully agree. Especially this notion of creating a space that is respectful of each of its members and open. What really struck me is how, what I think makes this collaboration very fruitful is how diverse participants are, and you guys have really put an emphasis on this very point. As Mattia said, it's a field that can easily be unbalanced sometimes, and it's very important that you have made sure representatives of every part of this field are in the mix, and I think that's what makes it extremely fruitful and productive. Yeah.
And that links very well to another questions that we have received, which is quite specific, but I think we can use it kind of to go a bit broad about our global topic and why we really think it's important for this project to be global. The question from Sarah is specifically of how is Africa as a continent doing in terms of using AI in the newsroom. And we do have some examples to share. In the report last year, one of the interviewees was a newsroom, an investigative journalism center in Botswana, actually, who was using machine learning in quite some inventive ways for their technology. But I think, Charlie, if you have anything to add about Africa specifically, but beyond that, I think it's really interesting to stress the point that David was making. We really wanted from the start Journalism AI to be global because we think there's a value in there. What have you learned over these months about the value that value? How does it help us?
Yeah, well, I think it's partly around, and I remember doing research about 15 years ago, looking at mobile phone usage in Africa with journalism. And what was striking was that they were ahead. I say they, you can't generalize about Africa, but where I was researching in Kenya, they were actually using mobile far more cleverly to connect with their audiences, to do news gathering and so on, because they had to. It was the most reliable technology they had. So I think there's loads you can learn from those different contexts. But also I think that the global part of this raises another question here, which is there's a real issue around inequality around all technologies, frankly, but perhaps especially around this. And by inequalities, I mean, for example, between newsrooms. You can have a small local newsroom which just simply doesn't have the resources that someone like the BBC or the New York Times has to do the R&D and to do the adoption and implementation. And of course, then you get geographical variances, and that might be economic, or it might be languages, for example. So I think there's a real danger that some people will, in a sense, get left behind, but also that the great ideas, I mean, I've been so struck by some of the, if you want to call them local news organizations or specialist news organizations like Testy, for example, you know, what they're doing with AI is really clever and really innovative. And so I think there's a lot that the bigger people can learn from that. But overall, as an industry, we are tiny. You know, we're a tiny industry. Even when you think of us globally, we're a very small industry, which is under huge political pressure, financial pressure, and pandemic pressure, of course, and just the pressure of journalism, frankly. So the danger is that the news industry, if it acts individually, and it could be a newsroom or one news market, may fall behind. Obviously, a company like Google, which is global and has vast resources and is doing amazing research around AI, and you have to think of recent breakthroughs from DeepMind and people like that. Journalism can't compete with that, but I think it has to work harder, therefore, and collaborate more so that it can at least keep up and not miss the great innovation in places like, I mean, Latin America has been a really important part of our collab, for example. Amazing work being done there. So I think it's really important. We see the inequalities, but they're a kind of positive challenge to us to reap the benefits, as well as to try and mitigate some of those divisions.
And surely that's something that we will continue working on as Journalism AI develops in the next year as well. So kind of stay tuned for more global opportunities from our side. I think we have one third question in the chat that I received from Shirley, so we can take that one and then start wrapping up the session and get ready for the rest of the day. The question is from Alan, and Alan is asking, what would you say is the most misunderstood thing about implementing AI in a newsroom? Charlie, what has been your sense on this?
I think for the newsroom specific challenge of implementing AI, I think the biggest problem has been making it fit into existing work patterns. Obviously it's quite complicated anyway if you're trying to come up with an audience engagement tool, or if you're trying to come up with a summarization tool, technically that can be a bit harder than you think, as I said, especially when it gets beyond a simple use case. So it can do the weather quite easily, it can do football scores quite easily, but anything more than that, it gets complicated. The real reason that it is complicated is because there is a news process already there. There's a news culture, there's a way of doing things, and the expectation is that AI has to at least match, that process, and those standards, and be that flexible and adaptable as a human journalist. And I think, therefore, often the question is not what AI can take over a journalist's task or a marketing task, but how can it work with the humans? How can it all, and the humans include the users, the consumers as well. And I think that's the toughest bit, because it's a little bit unexpected. The journalists want to do their journalism, they want the AI people to sort out the tech and just press go. In fact, it's absolutely vital that everyone works together.
Excellent. So I think we're going to take one last question that was suggested to me on the chat. Thank you, Shirley. So Hamed is asking, and I would say this is for both of you, David and Charlie, so feel free to pick it up as you please. Do you think that the digital divide will pull back the developments at the intersection of journalism AI for the moment? Or do you see there is a momentum that, regardless of the technological or resource constraints, people can still manage in newsrooms to proceed and actually benefit from AI in the short term, rather than having to wait for a better future?
I'll just quickly say, I think you have to understand AI is not some sort of overmighty thing that's the only factor in journalism. When I look at what's happening in the news industry, I can see, for example, there's a kind of consolidation going on because of the sort of subscription, the moves towards subscription. So you're getting big companies like the New York Times, for example, in America, which has got more readers, more subscribers than ever. And that's fantastic. But at the same time, it's making it harder for other competitors to exist in that same space. So that's already happening. And I think there are other really important factors. There are many countries in the world where journalists are more worried about censorship, for example. They're more worried about their business model, full stop, rather than whether they can get across, the latest bit of shiny technology. So the technology itself is perhaps not even the most significant factor when you're looking at what's happening around news. And like all technologies, it can be used for, if you like, good, and it can be used for bad. And I do think there is this danger of the industry as a whole not getting the advantages that other industries are able to extract from these technologies. And of course, there are certainly specific problems where a digital divide can open up. And I suppose you could include for the user, for the citizen, somebody who's super digitally empowered, can afford all the subscriptions, knows how it all works, will end up with a sumptuous, personalized news diet. But somebody who has a real physical divide, in the sense they don't have access to the tools or the equipment, etc., they may not enjoy those same benefits. And the great thing about the collab and the whole AI project has been, journalists are really aware of this. I mean, obviously we're dealing with lovely journalists, generally speaking. They're highly motivated. Even if they're working for profit-making organizations, they're on a mission. They understand that there's no point of coming up with tech solutions if you're not providing that core public value that journalism is supposed, at least, to try and do.
I agree with you, Charlie. I'll just maybe simply add that there are several ways to practice with AI for journalists. There are very sophisticated models that big companies can build as part of a large and ambitious strategy. But there are also some small tools that can be used almost individually by journalists working on a specific story or specific investigation. And that's the thing, what you guys have proven in putting together the training that we'll release on Wednesday, the hands-on training with Google Cloud AutoML, which is a training that in partnership with Texty can explain a journalist how to train a model to recognize images. That's simple, that's an accessible tool, and that's a way to do a small first thing with AI before thinking about a broader strategy. So I think it talks to the digital divide and a way to sort of address it.
And it's a great point that David raises, as we heard from many of the people in our network as they started using these new technologies and AI, how starting small with one experiment gave them insights that then they were able to apply to then be able to develop a general strategy. So I believe last year we released also our simple recommendations in 7 points about how to adopt AI as sort of like guideline for newsroom. And one of the points in there is exactly that one. Start small, pick up one specific area where you think AI might help you make a difference, study that in depth, and start from that experiment to then be able to bring the insights to across the newsroom for your general strategy. Okay, thank you both for this great conversation. We have all kinds of questions still coming in, and we'll make sure to approach them during the week in all the sessions. So thanks to everybody who has been sending in questions via our Telegram channel and on Twitter.